Hey everyone, Kevin here. The Wall Street Journal recently posted an article where they claim that America has too many schools. And most of their examples came from right here in Southern California where I live, so I thought it might be an interesting topic to cover. And this begs the question, are there indeed too many schools in the United States? And well, yes, there are, but I like that even the article thankfully pointed out very quickly that it isn't so simple. The issue more boils down to declining enrollment and birth rates rather than there just being too many schools inherently. And since the founding of our country, we've just grown and grown as a society, especially following the mass demobilization of the armed forces after the Second World War. GIs came back and began families like never before, and there was a true sense of optimism about it too, despite all of the other problems still going on in the world at the time. This new generation they created is better known as the baby boomers of the late 1940s through the 1960s. And this led to the growth of suburbia following the war and tens of thousands of new homes being built to accommodate this growth due to government involvement in both housing and development. Plus, the GI Bill given to soldiers allowed them to purchase homes that they never could have before, especially during the Great Depression that preceded World War II. So, as you can imagine, to meet the needs of all these new kids, new schools sprung up to meet that demand, and teachers were hired in droves. Fun fact, by the way, many former veterans came back and chose to fill that role, particularly at the collegiate level. However, now almost 79 years since the baby boom began, it has crashed. Millennials and Gen Z as a whole are having fewer children or choosing not to have any at all. And I'll out myself right now, too. I've chosen not to have kids either. I did my bit already by teaching thousands of kids. And by and large, our society is greatly different now. The low cost housing and assembly line construction of new communities that made it possible to house millions of new people following World War II simply doesn't exist anymore. Housing prices are astronomical. The standard of living has soared to the point that it's nearly impossible to sustain yourself on one income anymore, and as a result, most people throw themselves into their jobs or college to get better paying jobs instead of starting a family. The declining enrollment that came from this began long before the pandemic, too. My home district here in Riverside actually laid off some teachers due to that back in 2018 and 2019, but kept a lid on it at the time so no one really knew about it. But when COVID hit, schools temporarily filled up again online because it made it easier on parents who are now struggling to do their work remotely. Now that the crisis has long since passed, though, parents have started to choose alternative options for their kids or moved elsewhere entirely due to the rising costs that I mentioned earlier. Southern California is just a microcosm of that problem due to how absurdly expensive it is to live here. And as fewer kids attend the public schools, we face a paradoxical issue. Smaller class sizes mean more personalized learning that teachers can theoretically provide, but also less funding because that comes from butts and seats. Fewer kids equals less funding. And as less funding becomes a reality, the number of schools we have becomes more and more unsustainable. Many are being closed down to save costs, and students are now merged with other campuses. That, or they keep all the schools open and just lay off more and more teachers to create these huge class sizes for those that they chose to keep. That's exactly why public education is laying off so many teachers and support staff right now, by the way. Plus, we aren't even looking at the reality of how many educators have quit the field entirely, partly because, again, their salary isn't enough to sustain the standard of living anymore, thus forcing classes to be merged or schools to be closed for that reason, too. As an example, Los Angeles has lost over 300,000 students, New York over 100,000, and Chicago around 70,000 kids. I know these are mega urban school districts, but that's exactly the point. From the 1980s through about 2005, LA Unified was legendary for overcrowding and schools that couldn't even have enough desks for every kid. Now, they can't even fill most classes. It's become too expensive for most people to have kids and for schools to teach them. The Department of Education itself has forecasted that the nation's schools will lose at least another 2 million students by 2030. Educators are already burned out and worked to the bone. The few that remain are now facing the prospect of not only more demands with less funding, but more students per class who are also the most violent batch of kids we've ever had. Classroom management will only become more of an impossibility, leading more parents to pull those kids out in search of another option like charter or religious schools. And no, the solution is not to just have more kids. The solution is to, yes, make tough decisions when it comes to closing empty schools, but more to fix education and the absurd cost of living in this country. When people cannot even afford their rent most of the time, how on earth are they going to afford to have a kid without plunging themselves into debt? When teachers and kids no longer identify with what the school has become, then why stay at all? Public education isn't fun anymore, and the economy isn't what it was 80 years ago. We're not booming anymore. We're busting. And on that note, guys, thanks for listening. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have anything to add or need help escaping the system yourself. Oh, and please don't forget to like or subscribe. It helps me keep doing this, and I really appreciate it. But for now, see you next time.